This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 669, entitled "When the Word Monoconscious has very negative connotations and is a terrifying insult." Description: when there are millions of biconscious masculists, there will be millions of verbally bitter, hateful confrontations with monoconscious feminists who will be taught by masculists that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that monoconscious feminists are seen by masculists as being arch hypocrites and genociders, since masculists see the many gender crimes committed by women against men, for example, manslavery, divorce, rape, forced fathering, etc., as far worse gender crimes against men than those that men commit against women. Monoconscious feminists will convert themselves in their millions into becoming biconscious feminists, who will learn to be terrified of being labelled monoconscious by men, since they know that if they are, then they will be hatefully rejected by men, masculisted men, and hence be forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, utterly rejected socially and sexually, a prospect that will cause women, when they hear the word monoconscious, to feel a shiver run up their spines. Now the flyer itself. When the word monoconscious has strong negative connotations and is a terrifying insult, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I'm a great believer in the power of labels. If someone hurls an insult at you for being a racist or sexist or ageist, etc., then you feel truly insulted. I suspect that in the coming few years the same kind of thing will happen with the label monoconscious. It will take on very negative connotations and for women will become terrifying. I need to explain. Firstly, what does the word monoconscious mean? Someone is monoconscious if the only gender politics they have heard of is feminist. To be monoconscious is to only know feminist ideas, that is, one has only had one's feminist consciousness raised. Monoconsciousness contrasts with biconsciousness, that is, one has had both one's feminist and one's masculist consciousnesses raised, that is, one has learned that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades, the worst three ways that women oppress men being women's manslavery, women's divorce, rape, and women's forced fathering, which are such horrible gender crimes against men that masculists have a real hatred against such gender criminal women and are at war against them, aiming to exterminate them by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that gender criminal women rot on the shelf, dying slow, miserable deaths, because as most men become masculisted, that is, have been infected by the masculist virus, these women will not be able to attract the attention of masculisted men, that is, most men. Biconscious masculists have no patience nor tolerance for monoconscious feminists and treat them with contempt when they come across them, see monoconscious feminists as arch hypocrites and genociders. Biconscious masculists see monoconscious feminists as hypocrites, since when these women are monoconscious feminist lawyers and judges in the feminist-controlled divorce courts, These women push for equal rights for women, but reject equal obligations for women to fip up, that is, to become financially independent persons, by bothering to get career competent educations in high school and college, so that as adults they do not parasite off the money and labour of a man, thus manslaving him and divorce raping him for decades, ruining his life, which is why masculists have such a hatred of manslaving, divorce raping fluffies and fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. The feminist controlled divorce courts butcher the lives of one father in 4. Half of marriages end in divorce, of which 70% are started by women. And if the woman, the wife, has a college degree, that percentage is 90%. In roughly half of those divorces, the ex-wife turns into a vindictive bitch, out to destroy her ex-husband financially. And given that the monoconscious feminists who control the divorce courts know nothing about masculism, by definition, in brackets, that is, they have traditional expectations of men, that is, seeing men as cash machines, to pay for women to have babies, close brackets, these vindictive divorcing wives can destroy their ex-husbands. Monoconscious feminist divorce court lawyers and judges do not question that it is the man's role to pay for a woman after the divorce, the way these monoconscious feminists assume that men pay for a woman before the divorce. Masculists have a burning hatred against such monoconscious feminist divorce court lawyers and judges and aim to wipe them out. Masculists are abolitionists who see fluffydom as man's slavery and man's slavery as slavery, and hence a moral abomination to be hated and a war issue. Masculists are at war against fluffies and fluffy feminists, that is, feminists who still have fluffy expectations of men, given that they know nothing about masculism and nothing of the masculist expectation on women to be fips or rot on the shelf. The concept of FIP, F-I-P, financially independent person, is very important to masculists, since the fipping of women, the creation of a FIP society, that is, one in which both sexes, especially young women, are socialised and educated to be FIPs, so that they don't parasite and live off the money and labour of a man for decades of his life, close brackets, is seen by masculists as the precondition for the liberation of men, freeing men from manslavery, from the butchery of one father in 4 in the hated, fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. Masculist theorists are very conscious of the huge importance of the fipping of women. These theorists see clearly that nearly all of men's gender issues would be solved if we lived in a FIP society. In a FIP society, there would be no manslavery, since all women would be FIPs. The divorce courts would be based on the principle of financial independence of both divorcing parties. That is, both the husband and the wife are FIPs. So there is no alimony, no halving of wealth nor stuff. Custody of the children would be joint by default. If the divorce courts are not soon made men fair, then the percentage of young men who see marriage as toxic for men and refuse to marry and be fathers will only increase from its current percentage of 70% who do so until it is over 90%, and then we rapidly wipe ourselves out due to the crashing birth rate. The most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists is the fact that women have the MARA, that's maternity rejection right, aka abortion right, but men don't have the PARA, paternity rejection right. So millions of women are in a position to force fathering onto men by pill lying and paternity frauding. Pill lying is when a woman who really wants to get pregnant tells her man that she's taking the pill, but isn't, gets pregnant, then forces him legally, in capital letters, to pay for 2 decades for a kid he never wanted in the first place. Paternity fraud is when the woman tells her man that the kid growing in her is his, when she knows it's not. Masculists see forced fathering as a massive and truly hated gender crime that millions of women commit daily against men. Masculists want the legislation of the OPTAB, O-P-T-A-B, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births, to block women's paternity fraud. What is so hatefully unjust here is that women have the legislative right to reject an unwanted pregnancy that could ruin their lives, but men don't have the equivalent right, so do have their lives ruined by being forced by law, in capital letters, feminist influence law, to be man's slave for 2 decades to pay for a kid that she wants that he doesn't want. That kind of blatant sexism makes masculists hate gender criminal women who commit these horrible, decades-lasting gender crime of forced fathering. Masculists push for the legislation of the para, so that when the woman wants the kid and the man doesn't, then the man can fill in a government para form, so that if the woman takes the pregnancy to term, then she is legally obliged to pay the full costs of the raising of the kid. The fact that millions of women today force fathering onto unwilling men is a truly hated gender crime in the eyes of masculists, who punish gender criminal women so severely that we effectively exterminate them by forcing them to rot on the shelf, dying slow, miserable deaths by being totally ignored, manless, loveless, sexless, and viciously rejected both socially and sexually. As more millions of men become conscious of masculist ideas, there will be millions of verbally vicious confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists. These confrontations will be particularly vicious, since the biconscious masculists will not tolerate the hypocritical misandry of the monoconscious feminists, seeing men's oppression of women as rather minor compared with the much more serious gender crimes that women commit against men. For example, the big 3 mentioned above, that is women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. Monoconscious feminists initially will interpret biconscious masculist anger and hatred at them as just more misogynist hatred of women, and will explode at it, that is, at biconscious masculists. The greater this anger of the monoconscious feminists is, the greater will be the hatred coming from the biconscious masculists, who will see these monoconscious feminists as arch hypocrites, in capital letters, and will become volcanically angry against these monoconscious feminists, exploding with real male verbal violence, haranguing these monoconscious feminists out of the room with such verbal viciousness that these women will fear for their physical safety. These confrontations will very likely take place first on a massive scale in the universities, where most social revolutions today take place. The monoconscious feminists will go to their universities' administrations and demand that these verbally violent, deeply misogynist masculists be thrown out of the university. This in turn will result in very angry masculists confronting university administrations, haranguing them to, quote, "Learn some masculism, you monoconscious, misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi cunts," or, quote, "You monoconscious, male feminist traitors to your own sex," end quote. These university administrators will then very quickly learn that the masculists have a point, and that if they don't start really listening to what the masculists have to say, then they will have a real sex war on their campus, as thousands of biconscious masculist students per campus dump their monoconscious feminist girlfriends, spitting at them for being hated monoconscious feminazi bigots, that's MFBs. Soon, monoconscious feminists will not dare to dump on men in public to mixed audiences for fear of being viciously, hatefully harangued by biconscious masculists in their audiences, who will hurl abuse at these women with remarks such as, quote, "Learn some masculism, you monoconscious feminazi cunt. Learn that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that women oppress men far worse. Get a taste of your own medicine. We masculists target the men in your monoconscious feminists' lives by teaching these men masculist ideas so that they become biconscious, who then will not tolerate your monoconscious, bigoted, sexist, hypocritical bigotry. These men will then become disgusted with you and will dump your ass. End quote. If the feminist is fat or obese, as many feminists are, then she will probably also receive such verbal abuse as, quote, "Go fuck yourself, literally, you fat, ugly, unfuckable," because men, masculisted men, won't, end quote. If you don't make the effort to be slim and curvy and hence sexually attractive to men, then expect slim, health-conscious men to cross you off in a tenth of a second, and hence you are, the moment they see that you care more about food than men, and hence you are rejected by such men and forced to compromise your female hypogamous instinct by being forced to settle for men who are a lot less attractive in your eyes. Over time, as the number of these verbally vicious confrontations between biconscious masculists and monoconscious feminists explodes, millions of monoconscious feminists will be asking themselves, quote, "What the fuck happened to men? Why are they so hostile, so hateful to women now?" Question mark, end quote. The word monoconscious will be used often in these confrontations so that millions of women will become familiar with the word and learn what it means and why biconscious males use it with such ideological and moral force, expecting women to stop being monoconscious. Otherwise, these women will pay a very heavy price of not getting a man and hence be forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless and babyless, a prospect that will scare the shit out of women. In time, to be labelled monoconscious will put the fear of God into women. It will become an increasingly terrifying experience for women to be labelled by men as monoconscious, with its very strong negative connotations of being a manslaving, divorce-raping, force